Hi YouTube people, this is David Easterbrook with you today. Today I'm going to give you an interesting little class, a lesson on how to create air layer bonsai. Actually, today I'm removing them from some trees. This spring I did over 83 air layers. Some years I've done over 150. Why air layers? Air layers, when you're doing air layers, you're actually cloning a part of the tree. As you probably know, all parts of a plant are interchangeable. We can take a little end of a branch here and do a cutting of it, root it in the ground. We can remove larger branches by doing air layerings. We can also take a piece of this and graft it onto another species of juniper and change the whole species. So it's actually a method of cloning your tree that we're doing today. There does exist two types of air layers. One is called ground layering, where we want to create a whole new root system. And the other part that I'm showing you today is called an aerial air layering, where you're taking off an upper part of the tree. And you can do more than one on the same plant. If you look at this juniper here, there's actually 4 layers, air layers, that were done on the same tree. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Why so many? Well, this is actually quite a rare variety. No, there's 5. I'm sorry, there's 5 on this tree. It's quite a rare variety of juniper. It's called an Itoigawa juniper, and gawa or kawa means river, and so it comes from around the Itoi River area. It's a very mountainous part in the middle of Japan, and actually there's about 7 different types of foliage that come from that area. But they're highly prized because the foliage is very, very tight. It's almost dwarf, and it's a bright parsley green, and also it's a very, very hardy variety. It survives our winters, our Canadian winters, with no problem at all, and it grows very quickly. The first, I'd say maybe 6 years, it grows slowly, and then it takes off. It really becomes much more vigorous. So this is a small Itoigawa juniper that I started about, I'd say about, maybe 13 or 14 years ago. And to thicken up the trunk, I left all the side branches. And I actually only want to keep one section, this upper section that was wired last year. This will be my bonsai. But I'm a cheap guy. I don't like throwing away all these beautiful parts of this tree. I mean, they're hard to get. And not only do I make new bonsai out of them, but I also use them for grafting. If you use a rooted air layer of a tree, the graft takes so much faster and better. So I also use them for grafting onto varieties of junipers or species of juniper that are not actually very amenable in making new bonsai. So today I'm going to remove these, and as I said, you can do several on the same tree as long as it's not one on top of the other, okay? They have to be side branches. You can't do one on top of the other. But you can do them. The bigger the trunk, the better. I've actually done some trunks that are about this big. Here, I'll show you one that I've done on a Deshoujo maple, a Shin Deshoujo Japanese maple. Now this maple is, again, a rare variety. I have left sacrificial branches to fatten up that trunk for the last 30 years, but I'm not going to waste them. They're hard to get, and especially larger specimens. So here you can see this is my main trunk that I'll be transforming into a bonsai from here to here. I started that as a little cutting almost 30 years ago. And I let all these branches grow to thicken up the base of the tree. But as you can see, I didn't want to throw them out. So I air layered one here, one over here, and one up here. Now, they will all be removed pretty soon, within the next, I'd say, week or two. Why? Because once they're removed and they're potted up, you have to give them time to send new roots into the potting medium, and those roots have to harden off a bit so that the tree can get through the winter. If you just put it in before the winter, often the tree will die. So yeah, so I want to give it at least a month or two so that the new roots will grow into the new potting medium once they're severed from the mother plant. Okay, now you don't know, you can do it on any tree. I have a really large air layer on a Chamaecyparis, Obtusa nana gracilis. I have air layers. There's a trident maple here that was ground layered, and you can see that it formed new roots, but there's places like from here to here where there's no roots. So I actually opened it up the other day, put rooting hormones and put more sphagnum moss around so it'll send out more roots. Is it possible? Of course it is. Look at the base of this tree. When I bought this tree, it had really poor roots, guys. I mean, they were awful. So I scored all around it, put rooting hormones and sphagnum moss. I planted it in a very large, shallow wooden box and left it for about, I'd say, 6 years until it formed all these beautiful roots all around. So this tree, the base of this tree is actually the result of a ground layering. So a lot of the trees that I have in my collection are made from air layers, especially shohin, the very small trees. I'll often air layer off the tops of bonsai, and they become instant shohin. An air layer is almost like an instant bonsai. Sometimes I'll plant a large tree, or I'll plant a tree in a large pot, and I'll wire the branches into unusual shapes, let them grow for a few years, and then I'll air layer them off, so I have a beautifully shaped trunk almost overnight. So, great way. And not only that, with air layers, because what we do is we remove the cambium around the branch, around the trunk, all around. The new roots all come out of the upper part. And so what happens is actually we have very even root system, all at the same level. So they're great trees because they have great nabari, a great root. The roots are all distributed on the same level and about the same thickness all around the trunk. And also they're great for planting on root over rock style because the roots are young and very flexible. So I can put them right on those rocks and make some beautiful rock plantings with air layers. So I'm very positive about air layerings, and I think we should all be doing more of them. Okay, so I'm going to start by removing some of these branches, some of the air layers. As I said, there's actually 5 of them. I'll remove them, just leaving the trunk that I'm going to keep as a bonsai, and then we'll pot at least one of them up to show you the potting technique. Okay, so let's start with the bottom one. I always try to leave a little bit of the base of the branch to create a nice a jin on my future bonsai. So this one is off here. Okay, you can see the nice roots all around here. Now, when do you remove an air layer from the tree? Well, when the tree first starts sending out new roots, they're white, they're completely white, and they're too fresh. If you remove it then, they'll probably just break off. They can break off really easily. Then after that, a couple of weeks later, then they'll turn pinkish color. They're still not ready. They still aren't hardened off enough to be removed from the mother tree. And then finally, they turn this nice beige color in here. This beige, you can see it through the plastic here, okay? When they're beige, that means they've hardened off, and the air layer is ready to be removed. Okay, so yeah, very important to wait. Okay, and also while you're waiting for your tree to air layer, it usually the air layers on this tree were done on March the 5th. Okay, now I did them in my studio and there's not much light in there. Usually a juniper will take 2 or 3 months. So actually, you know, the roots could have appeared sooner, but because, you know, when I do them in my studio, because if they were outside, they'd be frozen solid. So I try to do them early in the season. Always try to do your air layers in early spring, because that's when the tree is most active, when all the foliage is photosynthesizing, and it requires that the growth, the leaves or the needles to photosynthesize to send energy back down to the air layer. It accumulates there, and that's how we get new roots. Okay, so do it early in the season. It's no use at all doing an air layer at this time of year. Okay, so the others we will be removing. Okay, so we've got one here. Okay, now these are great for rock plantings also. If any of you know who Masahiko Kimura is, Kimura-san does tons of air layers of Itoigawa junipers and plants them on these rock plantings, or actually neokarama stones that are very flat, and he cements them together to look like a high mountain peak, and puts these junipers in the cracks. You know, he cements the slabs together, and so in the cracks where there's cement, he puts in a bit of potting soil and plants them in there and creates these wonderful mountain scenes. So that's also possible. I like often cutting them off with a saw, because sometimes the juniper, the Felco pruners can actually break them. So here's another one that just came off. Now, when we're planting them up, we can decide what angle. As I said, some of them will simply be used for grafting material. If they have an interesting trunk, then I can actually use them to create a bonsai. Okay, and we'll continue. Here's another one. Okay. Now, you have to turn the tree around regularly while you're waiting for it to root, because I don't see any roots on this side here. There might be some inside. So if you don't turn it around enough, the roots only form on the shaded part of the tree. So to get an even rooting, you have to turn the tree around about once every week, okay, until the roots appear all around. And if you do, see, this part was facing downwards. This way, like this. So if you do a horizontal branch, what happens is, because of gravity, the pull of gravity, the roots only want to grow downwards. So you'll never get roots on the top part, because roots don't want to grow upwards. They want to, it's in their DNA to grow down into the soil. So by switching it around in a pot, generally the tree will send out roots all around though. Okay, finally the last one. Okay, so this part here, as you can see, this upper part will become the main tree, but now we've got quite a thick base. These will all be ginned. I'll be removing the bark and creating some very interesting gins at the base of the tree. Okay, and those will stay on for the rest of the tree's life. They'll be carved, they'll be whitened with lime sulfur, and it'll make they'll make very nice gins. Okay, so we'll put the mother tree away. And what I do recommend though is putting a bit of cut paste at the ends. Even if you're going to transform them into gins, into snags, because you want them to die back gradually, not too quickly. So, yeah. Okay, so we're putting this tree aside. And now we're going to get a small pot and we'll get it ready. These are great pots to use when you're preparing trees that are in training. These are actually Japanese training pots. They come in all sizes. As you can see, this one's quite tiny. This one is a number 4. Now they go down to 1.5 or 2. Or you can get very large training pots. You can see the size of some of these babies here. Look at this one, or look at this one here. This is a number 20. So some of these pots are humongous. Yeah, but they're great for bonsai because they're like I'd say they look like a cereal bowl. They go inward, so the water drains very quickly. The Japanese make very large drainage holes so that the water doesn't stagnate or accumulate in the bottom. Also, they put little feet on them so the pot will never sit flat to your growing tables. They're always raised, and there's little slots for the water to come out, okay, to drain out. And also, the Japanese make little little holes for your anchoring wire. And lastly, but not leastly, these have a nice glazed rim, because often if you're growing trees, moss forms on the pot if it's very humid, and you go to pick up the pot and it slips out of your hand. But here where it's glazed, moss cannot grow on it. So it always stays, it's always easy to pick them up. And these pots are high fire. They're not like the cheap pots you get from Portugal or Italy that you leave them outside in the cold and they just, flake and they break apart in winter. No, you have them for a lifetime, okay? So yeah, always, I like working with these, very much with these training pots. Okay, so we're going to put a little bit of screening in the bottom and anchor the screening to the bottom of the pot. So there's a rough side and a smooth side. This is the smooth, so it goes downwards against the pot. The screening, I just get it at a dollar store. They sell it in rolls, and it's not very expensive at all. Okay, so the screening is there. It's anchored to the bottom of the pot, as you can see. Now I have to put a wire to hold the tree upright, an anchoring wire. So I'll take a little bit of aluminum wire. This is 1.5. Put it through the 2 wire holes. They're made especially for that. And I leave it very, very long because I'm going to wrap it around the trunk. The roots of an air layer are very delicate. They're barely attached to the trunk. And if we try to twist the wire over the roots, we're going to break them. So in the beginning, I never attach an air layer by the roots. I always do it by the upper branches. Okay, so we're going to take maybe the first one we removed, okay, like this one here. Okay, now what I did in the spring was when I removed the cambium with a knife, put a little bit of rooting hormone, and removed about 1.5 times the thickness of the branch. I removed the cambium and I wrapped them with sphagnum moss. Sphagnum is actually fresh peat moss. So here you can see, here we're taking it apart, and now you get a close-up view of the air layer. Okay, now often what I do to not break the roots is I float them in a bucket of water, and the roots actually are suspended in the water, because when you're taking off the sphagnum moss, you can actually break these root tips, and you'll lose a good part of your roots. So I don't have my little pot of water next to me today, but I have been removing. I've already removed about 45 air layers in the past couple of weeks, and I usually have a little bucket of water that I use to suspend the roots. Why am I removing this sphagnum moss? The roots seem to grow well in it. Okay, well, the reason why I remove it is it holds a lot of water. And if I put it directly in the pot and put bonsai soil around it, it'll always stay wet, and eventually the roots will rot. So I think the best politic is to remove the sphagnum right in the beginning, so that I don't run up against a problem of root rot in the future. If I wait till the next repotting, by then often some of the roots will have rotted, and I can actually lose my tree, and I don't want that. We went to some trouble to make it. So I'm removing the old part of the trunk here. I don't want to break any of the roots. Okay, so here you see, this is where it was layered, right in here. The air layer was in right in here. Okay, now I'm just going to smooth out that cut a bit more. Okay, so this is now ready to repot. Now this will give me a double trunk bonsai. It's an interesting concept. They call it sokan. Okay, and they create really cool bonsai double trunks. This one is a little bit tall, and now another problem is always if you leave all the foliage, sometimes it creates too much demand on this new root system, which is very limited, and the tree can actually die. So what I try to do is reduce the foliage mass. Sometimes I'll cut off all the leaves. Sometimes I'll reduce the leaves in half. With conifers, you can't actually do that. So we'll cut off some of the foliage, okay? I could actually save this and make cuttings out of it so as not to waste anything. This is going to be the main tree. This is going to be a secondary one, and I find it's too tall compared to the main one. So I'm actually going to shorten it like this, okay? Now that reduces the transpiration. The tree will have less needles to, and will lose less humidity, less water. And that's the problem. If we don't have enough roots, or if the roots can't supply enough water, the air layering will simply dry up and die. So we have to be careful not to create too much demand on the roots. Okay, so this is what I'm going to plant. I start by putting junipers like a little bit of charcoal mixed in the bottom of their pot and also into their soil. So we have a little bit of charcoal here, about 10%. Now we're going to put in some larger grains of soil. This is a mixture of akadama with a little bit of, there's a little bit of chabasai, which is like a pumice, and there's, that's about it, okay? And now before we put the soil in, I want to put a few nutrients for the plant. So we're actually going to put, this is actually Osmocote. It's a fertilizer, slow release, lasts for 5 or 6 months. So we put a little bit of that in. I put a little bit of dolomitic lime because junipers like lime. They need a lot of magnesium. So we've got some lime around the edges. It has to be dolomitic lime. And because it's an air layer, it's never growing in the ground, it doesn't have any mycorrhiza. So this is mycorrhiza. This is actually living. It's it's actually like mushrooms, and they'll colonize the tree's root system and help it to grow. So we've got a little bit of that. This is rich earth that I put in to stimulate the roots. Okay, so now my tree, I'm putting it in a very small pot. Some people are going to be very surprised, but I purposely do that because I don't want these new delicate roots to rot. And often I use them also, as I say, for grafting. And if the pot's too large, I can't get it close enough to the tree. So I don't like the idea of using anything that's any pot that's too large. You might have to water it a bit more often, but it's always better to put them in smaller rather than larger pots. So I'm wiring very lightly around the trunk to hold the tree in the pot. Here we go, this side. And then we can do the other trunk with the other half of the wire. Here we go. So that should be pretty solid once we add our soil in. Now I can change the angle of the tree, put it at the angle I want. And here's where we'll add some medium-sized substrate. There's no real soil in it. It's actually artificial soil. This is pumice, 1/3 pumice, 1/3 akadama. It's a Japanese red clay. And I've got some other type of pumice in it with 10% of charcoal. So now, pack that down, but very lightly, because we don't want to break any roots. So I never use a chopstick. What I do, because the chopstick will break those fine new roots that are really, you know, hanging on by a thread to our trunk. So what I generally do is just bang the pot on the table to settle the soil between the roots, okay? And once that's done, I put a little bit of fine up here, okay? And lastly, I take a little bit of finely chopped sphagnum, and because once this is repotted, we have to keep the surface moist so the roots create a very nice transition for the roots to grow into. So this will keep the roots, the top of the pot moist, and permit new feeder roots to grow into the soil, okay? And so I just put a thin layer, okay? So there it is, it's potted, okay? And now what we do, once it's potted, we're going to soak it in a mixture of water that I put a little bit of Super Thrive in it. So it'll get put into this water here, okay, like this. And usually the water should come up to the rim of the pot, and it'll stay in there for about 20 minutes, okay? To make sure that the potting soil has imbibed all of the water and it's fully saturated. A lot of people lose their bonsai when they're freshly repotted because they don't water them enough. I'll just add a bit of water. Okay, well, as you can see, I'm adding some water. There's a few little azaleas. They were cuttings that I had just potted up this morning before starting to remove air layers. So we've got enough water now. Okay. Summing up, folks, go to a garden center and look for trees with interesting branches, or the top of the tree is really nice, and bring them home and use them as mother plants to create more bonsai, good quality bonsai. You can create really good quality bonsai from air layers. And don't be shy. As I say, you can do several several trees from one. Last week I was at a garden center here in Montreal, and they were selling a Shishigashira Japanese maple with a trunk about this big, and it was relatively straight, and then it branched out into about 9 or 10 branches. Well, that tree was being sold for $775, which is, for me, a lot of money. But if I can air layer off those 9 branches, and once they're removed and planted up as bonsai, and I can sell them for maybe, you know, $100 each, well, then it's well worth my time to go and buy that tree and air layer it next year, and then I'll get to keep all the base for free and create a new bonsai from that, and that'll I'll keep for myself. So yeah, folks, don't be shy. Go ahead and do air layers, and I'll do another video to show you how to do them, okay? I didn't have time to do it today. I just showed you how to remove them, and I just want to whet your appetite. So thanks a lot, guys. Until the next time, it's David Easterbrook.